Thank you for coming to our presentation on the Conewago Creek project. As mentioned before, this is a watershed-based approach to stream restoration, which will fulfill two communities' MS4 requirements, reduce our local flooding, and improve local water quality. My name is Monique Dykman. I work for Londonderry Township as the MS4 Environmental Specialist, and you are welcome to contact me at mdykman@londonderrypa.org. Also joining us, although I'm not sure if he is able to unmute himself, I've been with the township for just about 2 years now, so I have been fully immersed in this project, but we have the expert who has been with the project since the beginning. Steve Letavik is the township manager. He is on the call, although I'm not sure if he will have the ability to unmute himself during the question and answer. I hope that he'll be able to figure it out. He's been with the project since the inception, and it has all of the knowledge and especially the lessons learned. A quick preview of what the Conewago Creek project is. It is a watershed-based approach to stream restoration. As previously mentioned, it will fulfill both Londonderry Township and Dauphin counties MS4 PRP requirements, as well as Mountjoy Township and Lancaster counties PRP requirements. Additionally, we will reduce all downstream flooding, create habitat, and enhance the recreation available in our community. We decided to go with the watershed-based approach to stream restoration because we understand that you can't restore just one side of the stream because it impacts the other side of the stream. It is one ecosystem, and any changes that you make will affect the entire region. So through this project, we will be stabilizing both banks on each side. We will be creating flood plains on both sides of the stream. And by doing this, it will repair the natural functions of the stream and reduce sediment and nutrient levels. We hope that this project can be replicated elsewhere, and we will tell you all of our tips, tricks, and lessons learned. And if you are interested in learning more, please ask a lot of questions, but also know that you can access a much larger version of this presentation on our website under our pollution reduction plan tab, and anything that will look like a hyperlink is a hyperlink. And this is not the picture that should be here. Sometimes with there we go. Sometimes with this GIS story maps, the pictures get a little out of turn, so just bear with me. So as I mentioned before, our Conewago Creek project aims to restore the Conewago Creek back to its historic conditions. It will remove legacy sediment, and anyone who is not familiar with legacy sediment, I'll briefly explain it. As we change the landscape of Pennsylvania, of our region, we experience more runoff. Runoff leads to sedimentation, sediment coming off of the landscape and coming into our waters. Legacy sediment, however, is the very fine particles that fall down as the water rushes through and carries the big particles of sediment downstream for a problem at the Conowingo Dam. The legacy sediment actually falls into place and then clogs up our wetlands and our floodplains. So by removing the legacy sediment, we will expand flood capacity and remove the existing nutrients in our system. The legacy sediment is also highly erodible because it is this fine sediment. So that's a lot of the reasons why you see these incised banks in Pennsylvania. It's due to our old dam system, how many dams that we had in our rivers. By removing the legacy sediment, we will restore our on-site wetlands and create a more resilient creek. Having a more resilient creek and more habitat will expand the capability for wildlife to thrive in our Conewago Creek. Here in the background is the master plan of the Conewago Creek Restoration Project. I will review what our basic plan is. Our project is huge, as mentioned before. It is about a mile of length of stream that we will be restoring. And due to the size of the project, the construction needs, and also funding, we have broken this up into 3 sections. if you can see my mouse, I'm just going to assume that you can. Phase one, it deals with the main stem of the Conewago, starting about here, coming down, and also it will restore this section of Burls Run. It will add a lot of sinuosity into Burls Run, as well as having a catchment system that will be easily cleaned out with just a general permit for any sediment coming downstream, but before it gets into our project and clogs it up. Phase two is here on the Lancaster side. The Dauphin side is over here, and the Lancaster side is on this area. The phase two will restore this section of stream up until a farm bridge, which is right here. And it will also add in the secondary channels, which will be really beneficial for wildlife and also a flood mitigation measure. It will be able to handle, it will take a lot of stress off of the main stem and send more water into the secondary channels. And lastly, we have phase three down here at the bottom. You can see that there will also be some secondary channels. If you notice on this map, we are very close to the Conewago Recreation Trail, and our project will include a lot of riparian buffers and warm season grasses, along with bioretention swale right here, and as well as one right about here. Some numbers and statistics for our project. The project itself will restore nearly 5,000 feet, linear feet of stream, and it will also create in the secondary channels and adding sinuosity and turns and curves to this Burls Run. It will create about 3,000 feet of stream. We will restore about 15 acres of the floodplain and remove about 125,000 cubic yards of legacy sediment. By removing this 125,000 yards of cubic yards of legacy sediment, we will expand the flood capacity by that same amount. Expanding the flood capacity goes even further when you think about the reconnecting the groundwater tables, and the water will be able to infiltrate into the water table much quicker, allowing for even more flood capacity. And this project will reduce the yearly sediment load by 509 pounds, or tons, 509 tons, which equals nearly, or just over 1 million pounds. This project would not be possible without many partners. This is one of the lessons that we've learned, is we couldn't do this without so many resources. As I mentioned, we are 2 different municipalities across county lines, and that grants us access to 2 great conservation districts. We are working with 3 private landowners, and landowners have actually, I think nearly all of them by the end of this project will have switched hands. I think that it is very important to maintain good relationships with the private landowners that we're working with. We are also working with 2 technical assistance providers, being HRG and Land Studies. We rely on them for all the technical work, and they have been great partners as well. We also utilize our local regional land planning commission, the Penn State Agriculture and Environmental Center, and a plethora of local watershed organizations and nonprofits. We chose this site because it is heavily impacted by agricultural uses, and you can see it has eroded incised banks, and there is problematic downstream flooding as well. We know that poor water quality does affect everyone. If you can see that in this picture, the farmer, if you can imagine, the creek is right here where my mouse is coming down this way. The farmer right here is losing huge amounts of really nutritious soil, flowing right across the road into a bioswale and right into our creek. We know the farmer does not want to lose the soil because that has the most nutrients. And we know that our fish don't thrive when there's a huge amount of sediment in the water. Additionally, as I mentioned before, there is downstream flooding from this at this site, and we know that property owners have huge damages due to floods. Lastly, the recreation is limited when the water quality is poor, the fishing isn't great, and at this moment there isn't great access to this section of the Conewago Creek. We hope in our project we will mow some grass paths into the restored area and allow for better access to this creek. This group, I'm sure, is no stranger to the known regulatory requirements. The Susquehanna River right here does feed nearly 50% of the fresh water to the Chesapeake Bay, which is a highly regulated body of water. If you do notice a small little blip right here highlighted in yellow, this is the Conewago Creek. And while we are just small fish, we lead into something much bigger. 18 million people rely on the Chesapeake Bay for their drinking water, as well as many industries such as tourism and seafood. Again, this group is no stranger to the pollution reduction plan. We are required to remove 10% of our sediment load by 2023. This project will actually go above and beyond that requirement. Londonderry is required to reduce our sediment load by about 40,000 pounds per year, and Mountain Joy is only required to reduce it by a little over 6,000. Our project, as I mentioned before, will reduce the sediment loading by 1 million, and we will have an excess of credits. We hope that we can apply these in future years, as well as help other existing communities and improve local water quality. One of the first studies that we ran was to see if it was worth partnering with Mount Joy Township. So we got a NIFWF grant and we studied the economies of partnering, or you could think of it as the economies of scale. Through this study, we learned, yes, of course, it is better to partner together as you are able to create a larger project with less cost, because many of the costs are fixed. If you think about applying for permits, the initial site assessment, applying for grants, and hiring technical assistance providers, all of those are basically fixed costs that, if shared, can really double your project, triple your project, make it much larger than it would originally be. And this is linked, this study, if you would like to read about it, is linked on the the story map on our website, and I'll show you where you can find it. So this project, oh, I do love this picture. You can see, if you can think back to the master plan, you can see the current conditions of our project right now. There is not this sinuosity. There's these big sharp turns, and also really straight areas where the water picks up velocity coming down on Brill's Run. There are no secondary channels at the moment coming down here, and you can see the sharp turns and straight lines. There's a lot of water pressure. The project was a conceptual idea and starting in 2005, which is why I invited the township manager, Steve Letavik, to come and speak to everything up until just about 2018 when I came on board. Our project really got legs and started walking in 2017, where the initial case study was funded through a NIFWF grant. This is what I just showed you on the page before, and this is a clickable link if you would want to see the results of this case study. We applied for permits in the spring of 2020, and we hope to go to construction in the summer of 2021. One of our lessons learned here is apply for everything early, that being funding, that being permits, because you'll hit all sorts of roadblocks. For example, COVID has really slowed down the permit application process, because while we applied for them in about May, we still have not heard back from either of the permits that we applied for. So we're holding tight, and we hope to go to construction in the summer of 2021. We have been very lucky and very persistent to receive large amounts of funding. Um, Places where we found funding include the NIFWF grants. The Mariner East Pipeline 2 grant our location was eligible for this grant. We received 2 Growing Greener grants, but we also would like to say there is no such thing as a grant that's too small. We did receive a $1,000 grant through Pennsylvania American Waters, and I'll touch more on this later, but it's to measure the existing water quality. Last week, we were thrilled to, as the second NIFWF small watershed grant implementation was just announced, we did receive $200,000 in this one too. This will be going towards phase 2. Phase 1 is fully funded through both of the Growing Greener grants. And in contrast to the last sketch here, you can see again the sinuosity added into Burroughs Run, the secondary channels, and just a stark difference of the landscape here, the planned landscape. One of our lessons learned is we have to take a great approach and think very creatively into how we ask for grant dollars. Every grant program does want something different. So I will highlight some of the benefits of our project and also how we highlight it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And right here, we can see our project, and you can see that there's a great wildlife corridor, or lots of trees up here and down here, but right here we are missing the wildlife corridor. So some grants are very interested in how we are protecting wildlife, being our mammals and also our fish and amphibians that are living in the water, how we're keeping them happy and safe. Some grants we do say take the approach of the wildlife corridor that we are protecting and installing, and other grants really care about the flood reductions, the downstream flooding that impacts everyone downstream. Here is a flood from, I believe, 2012, and this is a water gauge station that the creek was well out of its banks and causes damage to everything on its path. So some grants are very interested in the flooding reductions that we are creating. Other grants will be really interested in the recreation opportunities that we are creating. So again, I mentioned the Conewago Recreation Trail is right here lining the project. You can see this big jet out, which is how I noticed where our project is. We will be really close, and we hope to mow in additional recreation trails and provide that for that outlet for our community. And we have relied on our partners. Here pictured is a partner from Penn State Agriculture and Environmental Center to collect really great water quality data, both before, during, and after construction. And this water quality data will allow us to scientifically illustrate the effects of our total stream restoration and legacy sediment removal, unlike it has ever been documented before. We hope that this will make this a best practice in the MS4 and watershed restoration industries, and also allow for more funding to be funneled towards stream restoration. We have the Pennsylvania Penn State Agriculture and Environmental Center, who monitor the Conewago Creek weekly at 4 different sites, collecting data on sediment and nutrients. We also partner with the Dauphin County Conservation District, who has been collecting data for 15 years at 9 different sites along the main stem. They also partnered with us for the Pennsylvania American Water grant of just about $1,000, but that allowed us to analyze pre-construction macroinvertebrates that were existing in the stream, and we know that macroinvertebrates are great indicators of water quality health. The macroinvertebrates can't just swim away from bad water quality in the same way that fish can. Macroinvertebrates, for anyone who doesn't know, are just little aquatic bugs. They can't travel very far, and some have varying levels of pollution tolerance. So the more bugs that you find in quantity and in quality will really key you into a long-term picture of what the water quality looks like. The Lancaster County Conservation District has also contributed to our water quality assessment. They have acquired 2 zones through a 319 grant and will be deploying them at the watershed site to continuously gather data both upstream and downstream of our project. And lastly, the USGS has operated 2 long-term trends on the Conewago Creek since 2011, and this is funded through 2025. And this will allow us to see long-term trends that are happening in the Conewago Creek. However, since water quality data like this has never been captured before, we just have models, and we believe that we're going to remove about 1 million pounds of total suspended sediment. However, we are going to rely on all the water quality data that I have mentioned before to see if this is really true, see what the actual results look like. And this is another aspect which we can present to grants, that we are creating a bigger impact than just our project, but we are collecting data on projects which could be replicated again. Other grants really like to know that, again, I mentioned habitat. They like to hear about the critters. There have been fish reintroductions that have already been happening on the Conewago Creek, and we hope to only strengthen those bonds with SRBC and the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission and reintroduce many more types of fish. Currently, the American eel has been reintroduced beginning since 2008 through SRBC, and you can see in this picture there is a freshwater mussel which will help further to clean our water, but they have a symbiotic relationship with the American eel. You need one to have the other. And then the Fish and Boat Commission has reintroduced the log perch to the Conewago Creek, and we hope to see more introductions and water quality impacts through this project. So I'm hoping that Steve here can unmute himself. I'm not sure if he will have that ability. I will go over some lessons learned and then take some questions if anyone has had questions. I would say our first lesson learned was to be creative, and that means about funding sources, small and big. Be creative about your plans and resources and partners. There are no plans too silly or resources too bland or partners that aren't helpful in our opinions. But we've also learned that we need to plan early and accept setbacks. As I mentioned before, COVID has totally changed our timeline as for grants and also our permits. So you've got to expect changes. As I mentioned, all the landowners in this original project have changed and will continue to change. So you have to be flexible with unexpected changes. Another thing that we've learned is to add contingency money into budgets. Some grants only allow for about 5% contingency into budgets, but we learned that we need to find that money somewhere else and have a backup plan of where that money is going to have to come from. Say you go over. And really, really that is to communicate with the technical assistance providers and ask questions about where is this extra work being funded from, why it's happening, and make sure to be on top of it. I think that we fell a little behind, not realizing that something would more money. And we have utilized lots of great relationships within the community and continue to build relationships with both private landowners, our local watershed organizations, and any other community, as many of our partners have different resources and they have similar wants as us, so we can figure out our neighbors and how our neighbors help us. And we have really appreciated that Mount Joy has a great partner in this whole thing. Every time we've asked them for help or guidance or resources, they have provided them. They have also taken us back and let us be in charge, which I think has been very advantageous because there aren't too many cooks in the kitchen, and they're able to help whenever required. But there have been no conflict ideas or interests that we have different. Do we have any? And lastly, this one, Steve's great idea, but he's been working on this since 2005. So what is that? 16 years. Don't give up and be persistent because it will all be worth it in the end. Thank you for listening to our lessons learned. I would love to open up the floor to Steve if he has anything to add to this presentation or any questions that have come in.
Thanks, Monique. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think if there's one thing I could say about a project like this and what may be beneficial to other municipalities is certainly creating the partnerships, having a clear vision, having a local champion. Someone's really got to stay on top of this and drive it. This process did start in 2005, but it was never put down. It was something that we constantly worked on, and it took that long to build the partnerships, find the funding, get the project ready to go, and actually have something that was viable. So, if there's a lesson learned that I think I could share with the group is you've got to have your partnerships. You've got to stay on top of it. You can't get frustrated. You can't hit a wall and stop. And I think the other part of it is have that local champion, someone that's willing to lead the charge, go to the stakeholders, go to the funding sources, someone that's really passionate about the project. You really need that at the level to make it happen. So if you don't have a local champion, I say for the project, I think you're going to be in trouble. But I think that was something that we learned is to continually work on it, never forget it, don't put it down for too long. Really key in with legislators, make sure you're tracking where the funding's coming out of. You really have to be on top of the grant process. And then get your elected officials to back your projects. They are instrumental in getting funding. So whether it's your state representatives, your senators, you have to form the relationships with them. They have to be part of your team because you have to be able to go to them, actually present the project, sell them on the project, and then garner their support to help you with grant funding. So I think that's all very important. And I think that would be the lessons that I would leave this group with, because even a very small township like Londonderry, we have 5,200 residents. We have a $2 million operating budget. We did not have dedicated MS4 department. We created that through a cooperative education program that we started about 10 years ago. So I think you have to not give up. Don't say that, well, we're a small town, we can't do this, because you can do it. But you have to work at it. You've got to be persistent, and you've got to put together a solid plan, a solid team, and get the legislative support behind you. That would be my takeaway.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Those are some great points as well. We definitely have time for questions. So some of them are starting to roll in. If you want to put your question in the chat, that'd be great. We'll get that to Monique and Steve. If not, I think we do have some time if you'd like to raise your hand, so we don't have everyone unmuting and jumping in at once. If you'd like to raise your hand, we can go one at a time off mute and ask your questions that way if you prefer. But we'll start with the first question is, what kind of permits did you need for this project?
That is a great question. I do have them outlined just here a little bit below. But we got the chapter, we have applied for the chapter 105 through DEP, going for the waiver 16, as well as the nationwide 27 through the Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Steve and Monique?
Oops, can I do
Yep, go ahead, Kathy.
there? How do you convince people at the get-go to lose existing trees and vegetation?
Could you clarify that a little bit more?
Well, I guess when you're getting rid of all the sediment, you're just totally grading out the land, right?
Not exactly. That's a great question. I think I do have a picture of this actually. I might have removed it. We will be keeping these tree islands here. We have the confluence. We have Brill's Run coming down here, and this is the main stem here. The clean out section will be within here. We are keeping these big tree islands here on the project, but we will be leaving as many mature trees as we can, and we will also be using any trees that are taken down to stabilize the banks. If you've seen those log sills that are put to stabilize the banks, I don't think that any of the landowners are actually particularly attached to their trees that we've heard of. We will be planting more trees, but actually instead of doing the typical 35-foot riparian buffer, we will be keeping the floodplain really open and planting a lot of grasses and meadow plants. And none of the landowners have put up any complaints, actually. So we will do our best to preserve the mature trees, but everything that will be taken down will be, aside from anything like walnut or a walnut tree that would have negative.
Yeah, and if Monique, if I can jump in here, this is Steve again. I've run into this issue in other places where there are mature trees that people are attached to, but the real way to get people to see the benefit is you lay out the entire plan, what it means for flooding reduction, what it means for water quality, how they can use that timber if they want for their own use or it will be recycled. And the other thing is the restoration plan really matters. So when you talk to them about putting a riparian buffer back or a multifunctional buffer or planting trees that are native species, so that way you're getting the right leaves to feed the right macroinvertebrates in the creeks and streams. That's actually been a way that I've been able to convince property owners on different projects that while you're making a short-term sacrifice, you're making a long-term gain, and you're also restoring native plants to the landscape. So I think that's really helped people understand the benefits of it, as well as the flooding reduction and on all the other benefits of the restoration projects.
Okay, do you have another question through the chat? Could you talk a little more about how you budgeted for contingencies?
Sure. Well, I believe that the grant that we just dealt with this issue with just allowed for a 5% contingency. We did run over this. We ran into some the permits required some additional work that we weren't expecting. They came back with more questions and we needed to do a further wetland delineation. And so we did run into a little bit of an overcost, and through that we learned we need to have a little more contingency money than the grant did allow, which was just 5%. And to make up that amount, we did work with our technical assistance providers to tell them this can't really happen again. They compromised on the amount that they did charge us, as well as we did have existing money in our next stage for the construction, so we did borrow a little money out of it.
Yeah, and if I can jump in again, this is Steve. One of the things that we've learned along the way is work with your engineer or your project designer, look at other projects that have been done, and you can get a general sense for the contingencies. They typically run between 10 and 20%. I think 20% is conservative, but is a better number for a contingency. So when you do your budgeting for your projects, I'd always build 20% of contingency in there. If you need it, it's there. If you don't need it, that's fine. It can go back into the main project, but that's a good number to use when you're budgeting for contingency.
Okay, Elizabeth Coletti, I see your hand up there if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. So I was curious about the process to kind of get the regulators on board with the removal of the legacy sediment, because I know a lot of people kind of have hesitancies about disturbing stream beds, and wetlands resources and all that sort of stuff. So did you have to do a lot to kind of explain to them what the overall benefit was going to be with improving flood capacity?
This is Steve
And did
again.
you have to mitigate anything that you were disturbing?
Yeah, this is Steve. I'll jump in again. So when we met with regulators, one of the things that came to the forefront was flood mitigation aspect of this project, and
Mhm.
that we have to do legacy sediment removal. But we also are doing in-stream work to improve habitat. So we know that in Pennsylvania, I think I saw a quote that almost every stream in Pennsylvania at one point or another had a dam on it, right? And so that created a lot of legacy sediment. It also detracted from fish habitat, wildlife habitat. So what I did when I met with legislators was really talk to them about the impacts of the flood mitigation, which is on everyone's mind, but also the fact that in order to restore the stream and put the species back in the stream and get them to thrive, we've got to remove this legacy sediment. But at the same time, we're going to make in-stream work and habitat restoration work that's going to benefit the watershed long term. So that's how we approach getting them to approve the legacy sediment removal. And what I find more and more is there's more interest in legacy sediment removal just because of the habitat restoration and the flood mitigation.
Thank you so much. Jason, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, just if any more questions, we do have a few more minutes for questions before we go back to the main session. If anybody has any more questions for Steve or Monique. And
If there aren't more questions, I can continue on in the presentation. I think it is really interesting. Please interrupt me if there are questions. But one of the most interesting things that I think visually depicts our project is the legacy sediment removal. So we had our public works dig these big 6-foot pits to see what is going on under the soil and under the legacy sediment. So if there are no questions, I'll just jump in and talk about this. Interrupt me, please. But here we can see that this orange layer, again, these are about 6-foot pits. This orange layer right here is at an oxidized level of where the old floodplain used to be. It would alternate between water and air, which caused it to oxidize like this. And all of this, which is about 4 feet up, is legacy sediment that has just come off of our landscapes. And then we can go down to this next site. We see 2 tall men standing with their boots sinking into the land. And again, you can see this orange layer just right here if you're looking at my mouse. And this means that this layer right here, we can see that this accumulated with it, had about 300 years, this tiny little bit right here, whereas all of this has, all of this has accumulated in about 300 years, whereas this we had carbon dated, and all of this was accumulated just in 10,000 years. And we did carbon date our soil pits, and we saw that at the depth of 5 foot, 6 foot, the organic matter had the age of about 6,000 years old, whereas just at 3 foot, 2 foot, it was just 100 years old. So you can see this immense amount of legacy sediment that has come off of the landscape due to our land uses and settled in our floodplains. So we will remove this legacy sediment, restore our floodplains, and get it back to historic conditions.
So, Monique, there's one question in the chat. It says, how were the
Yes.
sediment reductions calculated for the legacy sediment removal?
That's a great question. Through models, as we don't have real hard data yet. I don't know if Steve could jump in on this, or HRG had helped, and land studies had helped us with this a lot.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So what happened was our engineer and our consultant through land studies developed the models and worked within the models, I think the DEP and Army Corps put out, and used those models to calculate the amount of legacy sediment that would be removed from this project.
I will jump back in. I'm looking for a slide. It doesn't exist. I did also remember we did a bank pin analysis, as well as there was this stream. You can see the velocities coming down the stream. So I think all of that was calculated in part of the project.